Let me say a few words about Dr. Jackson. I could probably spend 45 minutes on his resume, but let me say a few things. He is currently the chair of the UCLA Department of Public Health. He served for 9 years, which is the first time I became aware of his work as the director of the National Center for Environmental Health at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. And because of that work, he received many honors, including the Presidential Distinguished Service Award. And he has a list of honors that I won't get into that go on and on. But he's written several acclaimed books and papers on the impact of design and health. Hence, that's why a School of Architecture has brought him, or I should say 2 schools of architecture has brought him to town. And his seminal work is a book called Designing Healthy Communities. And if you haven't read that book, you should go out and get it right away. And he's also been featured, or is being featured, on a 4-part PBS series. And I just had discussions today that, we probably should show that series here at school so the students here can see it directly. Now, let me make a personal comment. I've been an architect for over 40 years. In architecture, we have always thought of it as a creative, intuitive field, and you can't apply science and research to that field. Well, what Dr. Jackson and others are showing us as architects is that's not true. And there is now developing a body of knowledge that can tell architects and urban designers and planners and landscape architects and government officials and others what kind of impact we have on people. Very direct impact on the well-being of people. And I have to say that although I don't have that many clients these days, I can actually look clients in the eyes and say, you shouldn't do this because, and here's the research that shows that. So it's really to Dr. Jackson and now other folks that we can really thank of bringing this kind of approach to architecture. I think I first heard about this maybe 10 years ago at an AI convention. And I was kind of blown away at that. So the way we design our communities can cause obesity, diabetes, depression, and other chronic conditions. Probably would be a great case study for this, but that's another subject. And thanks to Dr. Jackson, we now understand this in a much more profound way. So Dr. Jackson, I'm going to have you come up.
Will the students in the room raise your hands, please? How many of you, let me ask you again a second question, how many of you went into architecture because you believed that you would make or help make people healthier? I'm going to argue that you do. How many of you believe you would make people happier? And I hope all of you put your hands up. And I think they're not that far apart because, people do a lot more for happiness than they do for health. When you're my age, you worry about health. When you're your age, you worry about happiness. There's an old joke about when you're young, pain is the absence of pleasure, and when you're old, pleasure is the absence of pain. And I didn't quite understand that. Nurses understand this perfectly, and nurses understand something else perfectly, which is docs all think what's important is what's inside the body, all the cells and the organs and everything else. Nurses understand in a very organic way what's outside the body also matters enormously to that person's well-being. And at a very basic level of wound care and dressings, but at a much larger level of the quality of the environment that an ill person is in terms of their recovery. I had a trifecta month. I had an awful month of August of 2011, and I had a wonderful month of August 2012 when a good thing happened to me from the Academy of Pediatrics, from the American Public Health Association, and from the Institute of Medicine. But one was I won this John Hines Award, and I'm very interested in, John Hines, it was the top award in environment in the United States. And it was given to me by Teresa Hines. And I really have learned a lot and love going to Pittsburgh, because in many ways, Pittsburgh has been dealing with the same set of issues that Detroit is dealing with now. And if you look at Pittsburgh, they have made enormous progress with the mix of philanthropies and business investment in creating a city that's really quite vibrant. Is it completely where it wants to be? No. But anyway, I get this award and I get this phone call. And if any of you ever listened to Steve Curwood and Living on Earth, it's a radio show on public radio. And Steve calls up and he interviews me. And off the top of my head, and I'm shocked to have you put this on the thing, he goes, "We have built an America that is fundamentally unhealthy. If you wanted to find a way to make someone out of shape, overweight, and depressed, you probably couldn't do a much better job than creating an environment where more than half the people in America cannot buy a carton of milk without getting in a car and riding somewhere." That was a totally unrehearsed line, so it's kind of shocking for it to be here, but in some ways it captures kind of the way I feel. I also am a Jersey boy, and I spent a lot of time, I went to St. Peter's College, a Jesuit school in Jersey City, and spent a lot of time going through the Hudson Tubes to New York, and we'd end up out in the meatpacking district and over by where the Hudson Tubes came out, and it was a nasty neighborhood. It was the meanest bars you'd ever want to see, and it was scuzzy, and there was a 3-story railroad track up over our heads, and you know, you'd kind of go through there, but you always walked along by the curb because you didn't know who's going to jump out of the doorway and beat you up, or worse. And I'm not kidding about that. By the way, New York's not that way anymore. And then an architect came along, and an artist and a visionary, and built that thing. And how many of the students know what that lower picture is? It's the High Line in New York City, 3 stories off the ground. You can't walk along the High Line without smiling. And I did a gig in New York for 4 months at Franklin Roosevelt's house last year, and my 2-year-old grandson came up, and I said, "Come on, we're going to go to the High Line." He didn't understand me, but his parents did. So we get on the subway, and we go down to this place, we walk up, and suddenly we're walking 3 stories off the ground, passing all these plants that had been rescued from the weeds growing out of the old abandoned railroad structure, and looking out to the Hudson River and the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, and the whole area is being redeveloped with the best restaurants and people wanting to live there. And I didn't worry about the 2-year-old, because when you walk in Manhattan with a 2-year-old, you got your hand on, you're holding his hand really tight the whole time, because he was able to sort of explore this whole environment very safely. And so it brought happiness, this good architecture, and it brought health, because walking is good for you, and it brought physical activity, which is a very important antidote to depression. And I would assert that beauty is an antidote to depression, which is something you do all very, very well. I'm going to apologize in advance because I have too many slides, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to skip by a bunch of slides. Come tonight if you want to see them. This is the textbook I use to teach at UCLA, and I have half urban planning and actually half public health students. The other half are urban planning, very few architecture students for some reason, business students, law students, and others. And in the second class, I match them up for speed dating. And I have the public health students match up with someone from another discipline. And they have to crystallize what their interests are in the built environment and health. And they have to think. They think for about 5-10 minutes, and then there are 23, 24 pairs of chairs, and every 2 minutes they switch, because they have to then do presentations during the course on some issue. And so one of my favorites was, at the 3rd year I did this, was one of the young women from public health was very interested in violence prevention, and how can we design environments that reduce the risk of violence? How do you put eyes on the street? How do you create sightlines? How do you deal with blind corners? How do you make sure that there are safe environments for people to walk? And especially a young woman is going to be even more in tune to this than a young man, even though we would be too. And she ends up matching up with a young man who's an urban planner who is designing the transit-oriented development, his capstone, for, it doesn't matter where it is. And he had the transit stop and the housing and the parking and everything else. He had never thought 1 second about sight lines and community policing or anything else. And 6 weeks later, they do this presentation that knocked my socks off. And he finally got, oh, what I build matters tremendously to human health and well-being and physical activity. And she, coming out of community health, never realized that I am being profoundly shaped. All my behaviors, my fears, and a lot of my anxieties are being shaped by the physical environment that I am living in and operating in and commuting through. And they got married. So I really had a very successful course there, and I enjoy the class a lot. I also make them do a 2-minute perspective, which sounds totally easy to all of them. And they have to present an issue with poignancy, energy, humanity, in 117 seconds. I let them record it because they're very good at voiceware. They all think, oh, that's going to be easy. I can tell an interesting story related to something around built environment and health in 117 seconds, and they all come back and say, that's the hardest assignment I've had all the way along. And when they listen to each other's presentations, and by the 3rd or 4th week of doing them, I only do about 5 a week, they're really good, and they really are poignant. And this is the companion book for the video series. I am a doc, I'm a pediatrician. Miles per hour actually means Master of Public Health, and the FAP means Academy of Pediatrics. And AIA was kind enough to give me an honorary degree, as was ASLA, but does anyone know what that last set of letters means? Probably the most important educational experience of my semi-adult life. Former novice of the Society of Jesus. So I spent 2 years in the Jesuit novitiate, and it was very much shaped my view of life and my values, and I can talk about it. Actually, I'll talk about it now. Your values really matter. Your integrity and what you say really do matter. And in my career, you can imagine the political stuff I've dealt with. I was Schwarzenegger's health officer for California, 37 million people. I was the top health and environment guy for the United States. Everything in environment and environmental health is about money and big political issues. And you gotta quickly understand what's the inside of you that is non-negotiable, that you're not gonna let go. And there's a lot of things sometimes you just have to, the union's that union, which isn't very good, is gonna get that contract, and you just have to put up with it because you can't fight every single battle that is in front of you all the time. I'm gonna skip these. These are basically the essence in pediatrics, and the point I'm gonna make is we are confronting an avalanche of healthcare costs in the United States, medical care costs. I shouldn't even call them healthcare costs because a lot of this is medical care. It isn't enough about health. So when I was a med student, and you can imagine I'm in Jersey City, and I get into the University of California, San Francisco in 1970, and oh man, I'm gonna have flowers in my hair. And off I go to San Francisco and got there, and I ran this event on the skyrocketing cost of medical care in the United States, because 7% of all the money in the United States is going to medical care. Oh, that's awful. So look what it is now. 19% of all the dollars in the United States going to medical care. And there's lots of reasons for this. But we live about on average 30 years longer than the great-grandparents of Detroit. That's the increase in lifespan from about 1890 to now is about 30 years. How much of that do you think came from medical care? How much do you think? And Henry Ford Hospital is a wonderful hospital, and I'm sure the surgeons are great, but if I walked up to one of the surgeons and said, 30 years, how much of it did you doctors that give medical care and medical care delivery came from you? He would say, 25 years. How much do you think came from medical care, and how much do you think came from the two big I's? And the two big I's are immunization and infrastructure. And that's in many ways what you do in architecture and planning, is you're creating infrastructure. I'll put somebody on the spot. May I put you, sir, on the spot? Give me a guess of 30 years. How much came from medical care?
Probably about 10.
this man deserves an A minus. It's very good. 5 years came from medical care, and 25 years came from immunization, and clean water, clean food, better housing, less crowding, air handling systems that you get bad stuff out of the house, safer workplaces, and the rest. So, by the way, we spend very little on the preventive side, and all the folks that have been doing clean water, clean air, clean food have gone off into their specialty areas and think of themselves as environmental regulators and don't really understand what they're about is people's health. We spend all that money, we're the healthiest people in the world, right? We outlive everybody in the whole world. Number 46 for lifespan. My son went to Costa Rica to do a rotation back when he was in college and sent me a note and said, "Dad, the people in Costa Rica live just as long as we do. Their lifespans are virtually identical to Americans, and they spend 7 times less on medical care. But the money they do spend is very much on immunization and things that improve the quality of people's lives." And that's what you do in architecture, is you're improving the quality of people's lives. And the most prevalent disorder in America after tooth decay is depression. Look at what's happened with consumption of antidepressants in the United States by people in the prime of life over the last 20 years. Now, part of it is the medicines are there, and part of it's doctors push it. But part of it is there's a palpable increase in the feeling of depression in the United States. And in some ways, what you do, the High Line is a very good antidepressant. But we don't give credit to the people that built the High Line for their medical intervention, the benefits they create. Now, maybe you all know this, but who was the supreme commander of the U.S. military in 1945? Dwight Eisenhower. And actually, the whole Allied military establishment. 2 things that happened. Eisenhower was in the military that broke up the veterans' marches in the camps on the Mall in Washington, D.C. in the 1920s, early 30s. And he was very aware that 19 million GIs come back looking for a place to live and getting their lives there. We've got to create a whole new work agenda for the United States. He also observed the Autobahns in Germany and realized how easy it was to bomb and destroy railroads, but these Autobahns were much better at moving men and material in a wartime. And so it was under Eisenhower, when he became president in '52, that we pushed through the interstate highway system, the largest public works project of the 20th century was the interstate highway system. And it changed this idea of America and the layout of America. But a lot of it was about getting those GIs in homes and dispersing people they were also worried about nuclear, and they didn't want so many people living in urban centers to the same degree either. So we create places like this, and if you live in a house like this and you have a garage door opener, you can live for years without ever meeting a neighbor. And we build places like this because obviously no one's ever going to need to walk. No 8-year-old's going to want to visit a friend that's 100 yards away. And here's a subdivision they built in Florida. And imagine you lived in the house right here, and you made friends with the neighbor on the other side of the fence, and you said, let's get together for Halloween. The kids will go trick-or-treating, and you got those bags, you got all that stuff, and you got an 8-month-old at home, so you decide, well, I'll drive over because I don't want to pass the baby over the fence. And so, but I actually I'm new here, I don't know how to get to their house. So what do we do in America? You Google it. And Google tells you that you can get to your neighbor's house 22 feet away by driving 7 miles for 17 minutes. Now, obviously I put this in as a joke slide, but it's true. And underlying this is one of my fundamental tenets, that when we think about the world that we build, we spend too little time thinking about the needs of people and too much time thinking about the needs of cars. And I was on the board of AIA. I listened to Frank Gehry when he was doing the arguments for the gold medal, for example. I actually live in LA some of the time, and I listen to Frank Gehry being interviewed about the Disney Center, the big titanium opera house in LA. And at one point, a caller on the phone said, Mr. Gehry, it's really beautiful, but there's no place for anybody to sit down. He said, that's not my problem. And I think this issue of architects thinking that the needs of human beings are not their problem is really very worrisome to me. So cars worked really well in 1950 and 1960, and the cars got better. Driving per mile now is 7 times safer than it was back then. Probably because you're stop and go traffic now. This is LA. No meeting ever starts on time because it's so. Building a city entirely on cars, which Detroit is a metaphor for the United States. We were talking about this at lunch. Detroit's sort of the cutting edge of where America's going, and if we don't learn from Detroit, we're all in trouble. This is an interchange. Think about how many trees. This is the biggest agricultural county in the United States, was Los Angeles in 1945. And the last crop isn't houses, it's concrete as far as I can tell. We've removed 60,000 square miles of photosynthesis in the United States in order to meet the needs of cars. That's the equivalent area of the state of Georgia. To meet the parking needs of cars, we have overpaved the equivalent area of the island of Puerto Rico. Think about how much concrete that is. So 1/6 of all of the increase in the CO2 on planet Earth, in the atmosphere, is coming from the removal of trees and tree cover. We've taken the best agricultural land in the United States, and I'm not exaggerating with this, and put it under subdivision. So north of Philadelphia, there's marvelous agricultural land that was kept by the Amish and others, 40, 50 feet of topsoil, and it's now being paved over for these huge car auctions and all the rest. So when I was born, the CO2 level of planet Earth was 300 parts per million. The CO2 of planet Earth in my lifetime is 400 parts per million. And every nurse knows that if your patient's retaining CO2 at this progression, they're going to die. So we have not paid enough attention to CO2. And we've changed the climate of America. And AIA has been very involved with sustainability and energy efficiency in buildings and the rest. So at this point, San Francisco has the desert-like atmosphere of Los Angeles of 35 years ago. Detroit now has the weather of about Kentucky, and Atlanta has the weather of northern Florida in the course of about 20 to 25 years. I'm going to skip injuries, but come back to it. I'm going to just go to this one. We have created an obesity epidemic in the United States. So the average adult in America today is about 27 pounds overweight. About a third of our population is we consider normal weight under a BMI of 25. Another third is overweight, BMI of 25 to 30, and the other third is obese. Obesity is not good for us. Overweight is debatably good for us. But I'm going to skip to a couple of slides and then I'm going to stop with these, and that's the slide. So one of the things we do at CDC is we interview by phone 200,000 people per year, which is what those maps are. The other thing we do is actually drive around in trucks and do physical examinations on 5,000 to 6,000 people a year. And we do in-depth interviews. It takes all day long. It's called National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It doesn't matter. They do the same thing. They've been doing it now for 25, 30 years. So here's a comparison of people in the prime of adult top earning years of life, a generation ago and now. Ready? 46 to 64, 20 years ago, presently. If people say they have excellent health, that's a good thing. They're usually pretty healthy. Do you think it went up or down? Isn't that shocking? People say, I need help going about my life functions, whether it's cooking a meal or brushing my teeth. 9 to 14%. Do you need a wheelchair or a cane? These people aren't that old. More than a doubling. This is costly. Do you think smoking what happened to smoking and obesity? The next slide. You know what happened. Smoking went down, obesity went up. But this is the slide, and maybe this is a good point for me to stop after I show this slide and talk about it a little bit. What do you think happened with regular physical activity, exercise, in America? Now, we've been wagging our fingers at people for 40 years saying, you got to exercise, you got to do this, you got to do this, go to the gym. People buy stuff on the New Year's Day that's coat racks that you exercise machines and all the rest. What do you think happened to physical activity? One generation. There's no drug that works as well for diabetes as regular physical activity. If you already have, if you already have diabetes, your survival is 50% better if you indulge in regular physical activity. If you're my age, your brain, if you do regular physical activity, grows by about 1.5% in size on MRI scans. And if you don't do physical activity every year, your brain shrinks by about 1.5%. I'm not making this up. I can show you the data. And there's no better way to raise your good cholesterol, lower your bad cholesterol, lower your blood pressure. And there's no better way of removing stress. So how did your grandparents and your great-grandparents deal with stress and depression? Routine and ritual and exercise. So in community. So everybody was going to farm events, barn raisings, church suppers, but it was ritual and it was music, it was art, which architecture is in part. And so what we've done by engineering physical activity out of American lives is we have actually created, or at least contributed to, maybe not alone, contributed to the epidemic of depression in our society. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I've said a lot of very provocative things, and I'm going to ask the young people in the room to really be very challenging. I know all these old white guys up here are going to be plenty challenging, but I want you to be very challenging as well. So let me stop there, and thank you for the attention.
Let me introduce all the panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to say a few things. I'll start with Dr. Carla Groh, who's a professor here at the University of Detroit Mercy, and she is at the Macaulay Health Center on the east side of Detroit. And in that position, she sees on a daily basis the impacts on our city and the condition of health to our residents. Next to her is Robin Boyle, good friend of mine. He's a professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at Wayne State University, former chair of planning and other titles at Wayne State. I just found out he's stepped down as chair and is taking a sabbatical. As a planner, he's been actively engaged in the issues of Detroit, and he's also the chair, I think, of the Planning Commission in the city of Birmingham. And then next to him is Glen LeRoy, who's dean of the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Tech, where the lecture will be tonight. And I want to get a clarification, by the way, is that 6 or 6:30? 6 o'clock, okay. And he has practiced extensively in the field of urban design. And I've seen examples of his work, and I have to say he's a master at that. So I'm going to ask each of the three panelists to say a few words about themselves and about their relationship to the topic that was discussed here, and we'll go one by one. And then I'll also ask the panelists to maybe pose some questions or some reactions to Dr. Jackson. So Carla, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. As Steve said, I am in the College of Health Professions. I've been here at the university about 18 years and have been the project director for Macaulay Health Center for about 6 years now. And my experience at Macaulay Health Center is really what resonates with Dr. Jackson's building healthy communities, because we see a lot of people at our primary care center who experience many of the chronic health conditions that Dr. Jackson is talking about. Our primary or the most common reason for people coming to our health center is hypertension, which is oftentimes exacerbated by obesity, which is about number 3 on our list. Diabetes is number 2, asthma, and then depression, and then a variety of other health problems such as arthritis and et cetera. But more importantly, people are experiencing these chronic health conditions at pretty young ages, but their mortality rates are really significantly higher. They die much younger. It's amazing to me how many times I go into work and a family member will come in and say that somebody in their 40s or 50s died of complications from diabetes or they had a stroke. And it's just amazing today that people are dying that young, which are really unnecessary deaths, really. And a lot of it has to do with the environment in which they live. Our clinic is located in zip code 48213, which is one of the most impoverished zip code areas in the city of Detroit. The median income is just a little over $24,000 a year for a household. Almost 42% of all individuals live in poverty or below the poverty level. And that rate goes up significantly into the 70s if it's female household with children under the age of 5. Many live in homes that are substandard because a lot of them are renters. And so they may not have running water, leaking roofs, furnaces don't work. Overcrowding because of the economy in Detroit. A lot of families are living together. And so it's extremely, you might have 2 or 3 families in one household. People are sleeping on couches, they're sleeping on the floor, or they just sleep wherever there might be a place to sleep. They live in neighborhoods where really you cannot walk because of abandoned homes, loose dogs, although I am not convinced there are 50,000 in the city of Detroit. But there are a lot because I see them out there as well. They don't have social capital in a lot of these neighborhoods. They don't have a good support system. Many of them don't know their neighbors. They're afraid to know their neighbors because you're not sure who you can trust. So all of it just comes together to make it really a very difficult life for many people, which oftentimes leads to the depression and the anxiety and a sense of hopelessness. Unemployment is high, or people are underemployed, many of them making minimum wage. So it really is an untenable situation for many of them. And to have a built community where there could be some sense of hope, something that people could look forward to, is certainly, I think, a goal that all of us that work and live in the city would like to see. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got 120 seconds to speak to you, is that right?
I'm in charge.
Interestingly, we didn't plan this, but I want to talk about a completely different world. I want to talk about the city of Birmingham, Michigan, which for those who come from Birmingham often say we live in a bubble surrounded by reality. But it's an important reality because the city of Birmingham, as many of you know, is a quintessential suburban community. I want to tell you a little story about goldfish. Goldfish is a wonderful small business. You couldn't think of a better example of a contemporary business that's been created by 2 young people, both of whom went to Michigan State and were athletes. What role models, fantastic. They came into Birmingham and they found this tool and die shop over in the railway district of Birmingham. Just over there, not the downtown, not the sexy area, but over there, over by the tracks. And they went in and they got some money from their parents and from other people, and they built a swimming pool. A swimming pool to teach children, 3, 4-year-old, to swim. To be healthy, to be fit, and to learn how to swim. Healthy, safe. What a business model. It's fantastic. And they went down there and they were successful. They were so successful, they came back to the planning board a couple of years ago and we said, we've got to build more parking. And we said to them, well, that's not our role model. That's not what we want to do over in the rail district. We want to make this mixed use, accessible environment that's exciting and interesting, and we don't want more acres of what Dick was showing you here of parking. And we're in a fight with them right now, because they say they can't run their swimming pool, they can't occupy that place unless we get more parking. And that is a real systemic problem, which is right down in the weeds. Now, while the story you heard from Detroit is truly impactful and very difficult, and the national picture you heard a few minutes ago is also difficult, my challenge to the epidemiologists and the doctors is also to remember there's a system out there, and that system is really difficult to change. So let me tell you one more story. I'll take up another 30 seconds. Woodward Avenue, 4 lanes north, 4 lanes south, posted speed limit, tell me, 45 miles an hour. Birmingham. You know what the timing is to get across that road? You can barely do it. You can barely get across the road in the time limit. Will MDOT change the timing on Woodward Avenue? They will not. Why? Because it affects the green wave that you all want to get from Bloomfield Hills down into Detroit to make sure you hit the green lights every time. That's a systemic problem which is right down in the weeds. And if we don't address these issues, then we're going to have this disconnect between what we've heard about and the built environment. So that's my question. Can we get these guys and others to change and not just talk about it?
You know the old saying about, does somebody have to get killed for you to change this traffic speed? Say, no, 2 people have to. Yeah.
That's what we like. Seriously.
Well, I have spent my education and years of practice and teaching in architecture, urban planning, and urban design. So I've done all 3. And are you Steve now, or are you Dean Vogel?
No, Steve.
Steve, okay. And as Steve said, I've done a lot of practice for decades in this area. And I was having a discussion with Dr. Jackson earlier today about the term new urbanism. Neither of us really like that term because it's been equated with a stylistic approach, unfortunately. But I think we both agreed that we liked walkability, we liked density, we liked transit-oriented development. We liked communities where you could live, play, and work. And that's what I've worked with a lot of communities attempting to reinforce. The interesting thing about it, however, is that, and I do like to have buildings themselves, which many of you as architects are most interested in, to be more efficient, energy efficient, and more healthy. They don't off-gas, they don't do all this kind of stuff. How many people do not like what I just described? Anyone? Okay. So we all, as architects and designers and others, we want these kinds of communities. And as I've taken communities through processes to deal with this, they look at their future and they look at a series of alternatives, they will invariably, by a 90% margin, they will invariably pick the more healthy, more dense, more walkable city. That's what they want. And you can actually go through and adopt the plan for the community that way. You might be able to actually go through and codify it in zoning ordinances and subdivision regulations, and then the difficult thing comes in. It's very difficult to implement because politicians don't have the political will to enforce it. Why don't they have political will? Because the people that contribute to their campaigns don't want it. The financial institutions don't want it. And what they want is quick, fast, and expedient, which is not necessarily the most healthy environment. So you have this dichotomy that's occurring between what we, the people, want and what our leaders are allowing us to have. It's really a worthwhile endeavor for all of us to pursue. And I would encourage you to not only get involved in architecture, but to get involved in the communities that you live, understand the relationship that codes and ordinances have, because by and large, most of them in cities still reinforce unhealthy environments. They have not been updated to reflect health. So adoption and implementation, and always think of what the final end is in terms of not just creating a nice formal piece of architecture, but a more healthy environment.
Thank you all. I do want to add something to what Robin said. It clicked off in my mind when he said it. You know, about 10 years ago, I was reading a statistic from San Francisco of the number of deaths caused by right-hand turn on red. Because people are walking, pedestrians in downtown San Francisco, and of course today they're texting, and these car drivers want to turn right because they can do it legally. And it was, I can't remember the exact number, but it was some amazing number, like 14 people that year were killed in San Francisco on right-hand turn on red. And that's all because we're more focused on traffic engineers in cars than we are on anything else. Certainly not on people walking, even in a supposedly progressive city like San Francisco. All right, I'm going to go back through the panel and ask people to ask a question they might have of Dr. Jackson, and we'll see what kind of discussion that endangers. And we'll start with you, Glen.
First of all, by and large, most people here are architecture students. Am I right? Okay. So, not all, but most. Okay. Okay. Then I'm going to ask a question on behalf of the architecture students. For Dr. Jackson, what would you say to an architecture student right now? First of all, you've been a board member of the American Institute of Architects, so you kind of know how we think a little bit. You're surrounded by 50 of them for 2 years. And how would you not influence an architecture curriculum to get us to think about some of the issues that you bring up? In addition, where do you think the field of architecture is going to be or needs to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years as the people in this audience progress into their professional lives?
Do you want me to go again? You want to answer or?
No, I can't remember that far. I'm gonna. No, I think I still have it on. Let me just say the thing. I admire a lot of things about architects. Actually, architects and physicians actually have a lot in common, because in medicine you have the ideal and the science and the academic stuff, and then you got a patient in front of you and you got 10 minutes to decide what to do, and you always have inadequate information and inadequate resources, and you're trying to intervene very readily. And so architects and physicians are always at this tectonic contact point between the theoretical and the practical, and you have to make decisions in real time. The thing of all the things I enjoy most about architects, the one I like is the fact that often you are confronted with something that's completely, scientific word, crappy. It's a lousy site, the materials aren't good, you don't have enough of a budget, and you're really, really constrained, and you end up, and all of a sudden, something is produced, like, that is brilliant. That works so perfectly. How did you think to design it that way? And the ability to inoculate beauty into what you're doing, that it brings joy to one's heart that you're looking at it, that's a wonderful gift that you have. I don't think architects need to. By the way, hypertension's high blood pressure. Architects don't need to know medicine, but if you remember Vitruvian Man, remember Vitruvius in Latin, was it utilitas, usefulness, firmitas, strength, and venustas, beauty. And that was 2,000 years ago. 500 years ago, Leonardo comes along and draws what did he call the Vitruvian Man? It was the human body stretched out in its beautiful symmetry, and he understood that what was good for the body, the strength and beauty and symmetry of the body, was what would work with a building. And so I'm giving kind of an indirect answer, but it is about the needs for strength, a useful, strong body, and beauty. And you're trying to create all three of them. So I tell docs, physicians, no, you don't need to become a member of the Planning Commission in Birmingham. But doctor, you do need to show up at the planning hearing and say, I'm a trauma surgeon, and I take care of people with trauma. And if cars are going faster than 20 to 25 miles an hour, the risk of death for a pedestrian is over 50%. And by the way, Mr. Mayor, I just took care of someone who was a productive member of society who now is paralyzed from the umbilicus down and cannot be productive. And so the physicians have to speak up to these issues and not be obnoxious, arrogant, and own it, but just to be speaking to it. And maybe the architects need to, some of the most wonderful hospital buildings are ones that there is a dialogue between the health professionals and the architects that are designing it. I oversaw, indirectly, I got the funding at CDC for 2 lab buildings. One of them was a 10-story, highly cutting-edge laboratory building. And I love dealing with the architects because I didn't meddle with the details of what they wanted, but I said, I want daylighting, I want a beautiful stairway that's going up, that people will be encouraged to take the stairs. I want big landings so people will then interact with each other on those stairways, and I want social interaction. CDC, my bosses, the financial people, gave me holy hell. What are you spending money on this for? We don't need this. Yes, we do. And by the way, now all the CDC buildings are being built in that format. Perkins and Will was a wonderful architectural firm to work on that. And Gensler was in Atlanta, was very good to work with as well. So maybe really I'm calling for is the dialogue between our, also calling for humility. When I was living in Sacramento, there was a vacant site behind where I lived. Sacramento has a lot of 100-year-old, lovely sort of craftsman-style buildings. There was no way they're going to build a craftsman-style building in there. But I wanted something that at least didn't look completely different from the rest of the community. And I went to the public meeting and I said, I know something about this, and this looks like it doesn't belong here. And the architect, he was from Portland, Oregon, goes, you want me to build something completely derivative? And I said, no, I don't want you to build something derivative. I just don't want it to look like a sore thumb that doesn't fit with the community. And so dialogue, humility, and community.
Let me pick up on that theme and ask, to what extent is your message resonating within the medical profession? My friends who might be medics, they don't talk about this. Their concerns in rank order: number 1, Obamacare; number 2, Obamacare; number 3, Obamacare. And there's not much else. There's not much conversation going on. The little story about goldfish was that the swimming pool business was actually put into a building that was actually owned and redeveloped by orthodontists. By the way, dentists are often the ones that bring money into small towns, if you didn't know that. And the conversation with them about their additional parking lot is a very fractious discussion. They don't get it. They simply don't get it. There's got to be space for the SUV within 5 paces of the door so that mum can carry little Johnny into the swim club, and they're not going to share a parking lot which is across the street. It's as basic as that. So my question to you is, to what extent is this debate which has infused the Urban Land Institute? There's now 10 principles of designing healthy communities, which is quite an accessible little publication that came out a year ago. There's videos of the sort that we've seen. It's in our textbooks now. We're building it into our lectures in urban planning. Is the same conversation happening in the medical profession, and is the new generation of doctors getting it?
You've all seen the picture of the fish swirling in what they call the fish ball in the water, and it's very beautiful, and they're all swirling. All of a sudden they turn and go in a different direction, and you see this with birds as well. And it turns out they've done the mathematics of this, and it works out with human change as well. And when about 7% of the flock or the group begins to move in a certain direction, particularly if they're the, if you will, the most charismatic ibises or whatever the animals are or something else, the whole herd begins to move. So it's very important to not feel like you're being dictated by the dunderheads. And physicians, and for that matter, dentists that go into the profession just to make money, I don't bother listening to them too much. More than half the physicians in the United States now are graduates, are women. Many of the women want to be working, and I'm just saying it outright, they want hourly jobs. And they want a salary, they don't want to be paid as entrepreneurs independently. So Kaiser Permanente, 1/3 of all the medical care in California is now Kaiser Permanente, is deeply into building green and very sustainable hospitals. And the Children's Hospital in University of Michigan, the push to make that sustainable and humane and green came from the pediatric residents. It wasn't the administration. And so the bright young docs are actually, I think, much further ahead on this than the old timers who are trying to, pay off the next thing on the land yacht that they're, whatever kind of yacht they've got. So I wouldn't worry too much about the dinosaurs. I think we're in a new era, and the young people don't want, number of driver's permits for 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds have dropped dramatically. And the kids that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you aren't as worried, but a lot of you are really worried about climate change. You're really worried about the trajectory of where our society is going. I'm desperately worried about both the economy and military stature of the United States. Not that I think we need to be the toughest, meanest people in the world, but we're not going to be effective if we have a dysfunctional economy and we're not admirable to the rest of the world. And we have failed at that in the last 15 years. The whole world liked us a lot in 2000, 2001, and we're really looked down on, and we haven't shown the moral leadership we should. And I think medicine needs to show that moral leadership too. So don't be dictated by the least. They were all the bottom of their class, even if they're rich.
I'll throw a question in here, Dr. Jackson, then we'll open it up to the audience, so you might want to start thinking about it. As you know, Detroit is in, I won't call it I'll call it an unnatural disaster situation. With New Orleans being a natural disaster, Detroit's an unnatural disaster. And of course, in long term, we have produced Detroit Future City. And I know you had an opportunity this morning to meet with the Detroit Future City folks. And I'm curious about your reaction to the strategies that they have proposed and how that feeds in or does not feed into your concepts.
I'm a complete expert on this because I've spent 2 hours thinking about it. So, the old joke about, you visit a place for a day, you can write a novel. If you visit for a week, you can write a short story. And if you visit for a year, you can't write anything at all. One is, and I'm just say this to young people, strategic planning looks like people are just sitting around talking, and it's not important. It's hugely important, and it's the dialogue of strategic planning that is the most important thing. It's the talking to each other and figuring out what are the critical things that really does matter. In some ways it matters less what the number 1, 2, and 3 priority is going to be. What matters is that people bring it. So when I was at CDC, we funded something called PACEH. It doesn't protocol for advancing community effectiveness, environmental health. So we were in Iquitos, Brazil. People in the slums along the Amazon had a list of 25 problems, whether it was solid waste, it was food, it was drinking water, it was you name it. And we went through a dialogue process with them. Guess what they picked after about 6 weeks of community dialogue is the most important thing for their community? I never would have predicted it. They wanted a shelter about the size of this room where the kids could go to school during the day and learn, and where in the evening they could have community meetings and sometimes dinners or something else where they could figure out what to do next. I never, I would have picked clean drinking water or latrines or something else. they pick this, and it doesn't matter what you pick. So number one, the dialogue process is really important. Number two, I think designing cities in a way that is similar to inoculating a bacterium on a big petri dish with agar in it, and having the bacteria look the first day and it's this big, and the next day, and about 4 days later the bacteria have grown over and the entire petri dish is covered with bacteria. Well, that's the way Atlanta grew and many other American cities grew. And really effective cities need to be nodes along with a real density of community, because, and this is pretty wild, but as I'm sitting there looking at the diagram of what's supposed to happen with Detroit, I think having a vision of creating a set of nodal communities. The joke in New York is the biggest bunch of small towns in the world, and people are happy in smaller towns. And I only studied it for 2 hours, but I don't know what you're going to do with 40 square miles of abandoned lot. You can't provide infrastructure to an isolated home, one on each block. We've got to figure out some way to coalesce people to get the services that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the expert on Detroit Future City, but I think the idea of urban village is really key to that idea. Okay, so people in the audience, you have questions for any of the panelists? Don't be shy.
Yeah, let me ask one of the students, what are you most worried about in your career? And I know you're all worried about getting jobs, but you will get a job. What are you most worried about?
Here you go.
I can't hear you. So,
Her effect on the community, her impact on the community.
and you're going to have that impact. I'm sorry. I was actually trying to get somebody to speak, but whatever you want to say is fine with me.
Yeah, you did put me on the spot right now. No, I am worried about my impact on the community when I get into the field that's going to be my career. I want it to be positive. I want it to be bridging a gap between generations and diversity. I want everybody to get together pretty much and be unified. I feel like we are pretty much separated, and I would like to get into psychology. I would love to do counseling, is what I'm going to go for.
Thank you. Someone else? Yes.
I'm Carla. I teach at the Health Information Management program here at UM, and four of my students are here. So my question is to really all of you. How is data used in your collaboration of epidemiology and architecture? What data do you use? What data do you trust? And what message would you have for these 4 students who are studying to be informatics specialists, and what roles they have in this field?
Did you pick up all of that? I picked up some of it too. There's a very good website at CDC called www.cdc.gov/healthyplaces. I'll send to you the Urban Land Institute articles, and I help write. They've done 4 major reports now. One is 10 principles. Principle number 1 is put people first. These are developers, guys that I thought they were just busy making money. Put people first, the needs of people first. Number 5 was, maybe this is a big one to take away, make the healthy choice the easy choice. We make being healthy in the United States the hardest thing of all. I joke about getting a carton of milk, but going for a walk, when we lived in Atlanta, my son was a distance runner, and I had to drive him about 10 miles to find a place where he could actually go for a distance run safely, because otherwise it was endless streets like Birmingham. So I would not attempt to read all the epidemiology. It's very dense, difficult reading. But the fundamental principles, remember, people need to walk. People need to eat relatively healthy food. The less meat, the less fat, the better. The more fruits and vegetables, the better. People need to be around people they care about and love. And so one of the best ideas from urbanism, I wouldn't call it new urbanism, is creating communities where there's different size apartments, different income apartments, where grandparents can be close enough to their grandchildren, because now most young couples both work, and they don't have the safety net for those children the way back when there was a one income family. So having parents, grandparents closer to the children and grandchildren, and the old is an African saying, but only the old can untie the knot. What it means is there's a lot of wisdom in our elderly, and we Americans have been too dismissive of the wisdom that needs to be transmitted to children from our elderly, and for that matter, the vitality that needs to be transmitted from our children to our elderly. So multi-generational, multi-income. I grapple with the next thing I'm going to say, which is multi-ethnic, and the reason is in Los Angeles, we have the biggest Armenian community, the biggest Irish community, the biggest, you name whatever, Vietnamese, Thai, whatever it is, anywhere. And people are really happy in their ethnic community. So they don't really want to be dispersed outward. And so really the solution for that pluralism, I think, is to really enjoy the differences, but not to compel a blending, because I think in some ways it's a recipe for making people unhappy. And I really like it because I can get very good Japanese, Armenian, whatever kind of food I want anytime, except I don't own a car, so getting around LA is hard.
Well, let me challenge you a bit. I've recently had a chance to look at some of the literature coming into urban studies and planning from the world of epidemiology. And I get the horrible sense that large amounts of data thrown at the issue is going to solve the problem. The more data, the more chances we are of solving it. I am skeptical of that. I think what I would like you to teach your students is the importance of understanding the data and then presenting that data to those who can make a difference. And that probably is not in the form of a regression. It's probably not in the form of a very complicated table from Excel or whatever, but actually is a single or a number of related statistics that tell the story. One of the founding fathers of urban planning was a biologist. He came from the city of Dundee, Scotland. His name was Patrick Geddes. And Patrick Geddes had a very simple trilogy. Folk being people, us, which resonates with what Dr. Jackson says. First off, started about learning about people. Work is critical to what we do. And he's a Calvinist, obviously coming from that part of the world. It's very important to work. But it is important, it's terribly important. Work can come in a number of reasons and place. Folk, work, place is the Geddesian trilogy from 1899. 100 years later, that's what we need to think about. So don't let the statistics get in the way. I know that sounds almost the wrong way around, but truthfully, epidemiologists need to be selective and be able to convince people what really matters, whether it's about activity or food or atmospheric conditions or whatever. Too much data to get in the way of change.
Can I just make another quick suggestion, which is, what do politicians understand and know and like better than anything else? Oh, I hadn't thought of that one. When you go meet an elected official, they want a story. And that's why I make my students do something in 2 minutes. They want a cogent story, and if it comes from their district, they will remember it. I guarantee you. And so you've got to open up with a story, because they tend to be extroverts that, in general, good ones, like people. What's the second thing? They're really good at this. Maps. Politicians are really good at maps. So for the young people in this room, get good at GIS. Get good at laying out data in a visual way. And you are good at it, but it's really a skill.
Yeah, let me just reflect on an experience from my career in architecture. We were working with a not-for-profit organization that was going to do a new building. and they wanted it to be a green building, a healthy building. And they have a funding community that they're working with to attempt to raise the funds for the building. And so they said, how can we make the case to these funders? So we actually did the research. We didn't do our own research, but we found the research based on healthy buildings. And there are terrific statistics that say if your building is healthier, you have less sick days, you have more productive people, there's less turnover. All the stuff is out there. And there's some empirical studies. Healthy building, unhealthy building, the same company, and you know the effects are just profound. So we go and present all this information to the funders, and what would the funders do? And these are very philanthropic people. We don't want to spend 1 cent more on this building. They're looking at it as an initial cost only, not as an investment. And we believe that this building is going to be 5 or 10% more, being a healthy building and isn't off-gassing for people and causing them health problems. We think it's going to be more expensive, so therefore we will not back that. And it was a real blow to think about these community-based foundations that will not support health, and that the dollar is actually the thing that wins in that case.
Contrary, Kaiser Permanente, their first green buildings with 1-pass air handling and all the rest, those buildings cost about 5 to 8% more in the beginning. They've now got the cost down to parity with what else can be built. Kaiser now has moved to no antibiotic-treated food and organic food in the cafeterias. And guess what? It's improved their competitive market share. It's not hurt them at all. And probably it reduced hospital infections and drug resistance.
So it does have a bottom line related to cost.
But it doesn't happen right away.
Exactly. But it's that more offsetting cost. It's not the immediate. Yeah. But it does sound kind of going with what you're saying, is that really education is such an important piece of this, that we have to educate everybody. Even people who are in the areas need more education in terms of the overall effect on health in terms of buildings in the community.
I'm going to ask one more very specific question, and then we're going to have to close it off with maybe some very brief last comments, and students are going to start getting off the class. My question as an architect is, there's a lot of chatter today about elevators in buildings, that they don't stop at they're programmed not to stop at every floor, to force people to use the stairways. Is that really happening in a big way across the country, or is that a sort of one-off kind of thing?
My understanding is the new Caltrans building in Los Angeles was built with skip-stop elevators, and it was the idea that you'd make it easy. But then you have to put the stairways near the elevators so it's pleasant to go up one floor or down the one floor, number one. And if you're disabled, you actually can order the elevator to stop on the floor that you want. I'm going to actually push back just slightly, Steve, which is every time in America we think we've got the magic potion. Oh, we'll put everybody in cars and everything will be fine and our cities will be great. It always works wrong. And the best cities and the best places are kind of fractal. And by that I mean they add on using the wisdom of the day to what they've got already. And every time we decide we've got the absolute cure, we're going to make buildings as sterile as operating rooms, we then turn around and go, oh man, it didn't turn out the way we wanted. So I think use your wisdom in real life circumstances, listening to real life people would be what I'd like to suggest.
All right, any last comments from the families?
To the students in the room, I think the ability to connect what you've heard about the big picture all the way through the systems that you'll come across to the fine grain is very important. I think one of our problems is that we tend to segment our thoughts into these different scales. Lessons from history would suggest that if we know how to make the connection between the big challenges and the fine grain, I think is terribly important. Something as simple as curb heights, something as simple as I described, the crossing times on roads, something as simple as if you're elderly, you might want to walk because your doc is encouraging you to do it. Your healthcare professional, I apologize, is telling you to do it. But we don't allow seats anywhere in the city. Why? Because seats are where vagrants hang out. Maybe we should change our mindset and make sure that everywhere there's a place where folks are going to be walking, we should have a bench so that you can have a seat and just watch the world go by and stand up. Go to Europe and go and look at the number of seats there are everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Why? Because it gets hot and you want to have a seat and chat to your neighbor and then wander on. So if you can connect to this small thing, the seat in the square, because Dr. Jackson said that walking is important. We make that connection, is very powerful.
I guess my last comment would be where you live really does make a difference in your health. And some people live in communities where maybe you have more opportunities, but not every community has that. So as you're developing and planning communities, be cautious and think about that and ask the people who live in those communities what their needs are.
And my last comment is that none of us here, no matter what discipline we come from have the answers. Collectively, we might have good answers, but not individually. The first thing that I always used to do when we approached a problem was to put together a multidisciplinary team so that we could attack problems and issues from all kinds of different directions. And it certainly was not the way that I was educated in a school of architecture back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, where we were taught from a very egocentric point of view that we had all the answers. And it took me several years of realization in the profession to know that we didn't. And so I think the good fortune is many of you are going to be getting out of school knowing the limitations of your profession, but trying to seek the collaborators that you're going to need to really address problems.
Dr. Jackson, any last comments?
I mean, in this case, the young people here are much more comfortable with horizontal access of information. It took us sometimes a day in the library to find one good reference, and you've got the world's information at your fingertips, and you're very accustomed to that. That's a tremendous gift, but it's going to require a new way of thinking compared to the past. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, for example, is we have Pixar down the street in Berkeley. How could we use this reality where people can put the earphones on and the goggles and then re-envision the neighborhood and maybe in a dialogue process be able to figure out a way to say to people using these kind of technologies, what do you want your community to look like? And really create a new kind of dialogue, because everything we're looking at was in somebody's mind at some point, except for those bodies. But everything else was in somebody's mind. And what we can put in our own minds and create and put in other people's minds ought to advance human life and the joy we have in our existence with each other as well.